You didn't lose motivation because you're broken. You lost it because your old fuel died and no one told you what replaces it. What you're feeling right now is the sign of a deeper power turning on. Something strange happened after you woke up. Not the kind of awakening people glamorize online, but the real one. The kind that strips illusions, quiets the noise, and suddenly leaves you staring at your own life, wondering why nothing pulls you forward anymore. Goals that once mattered feel empty. Hustle feels fake, and that drive everyone else seems to have, gone. Here's the counterintuitive truth most spiritual content avoids. Losing motivation after awakening is not a failure. It's a necessary psychological phase. Carl Jung understood this long before spiritual awakening became a trending phrase. He saw that when the ego collapses, the old motivation system collapses with it. And if you don't understand what comes next, you'll mislabel transformation as depression and sabotage your own becoming. This video isn't here to hype you up or tell you to raise your vibration. It's here to explain what's actually happening inside your psyche, why this void exists, and how a deeper, more sustainable kind of motivation begins to form, one rooted in alignment, not pressure. If you've been feeling numb, directionless, or quietly disconnected after awakening, stay with me. What you're experiencing isn't the end of your fire. It's the moment right before a different flame appears. You didn't lose your spark overnight. It faded the way sound fades when you walk out of a crowded room and close the door behind you. At first, the quiet feels powerful, even relieving. No more noise, no more chasing, no more proving. But then, days later, that same silence starts to feel heavy, like something important went missing. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. This silence after awakening isn't emptiness, it's recalibration. Your motivation didn't disappear, it stopped responding to the old signals that once controlled your ego and sense of meaning. Think of it like changing radio frequencies. For years, your inner system was tuned to survival, approval, achievement, and external validation. That frequency kept you moving, hustling, striving. After awakening, that station goes dead. And instead of music, you hear static. That's when people panic and say, I feel numb, or I have no motivation. But what's really happening is deeper. Yourself is refusing to run on outdated fuel. The silence is not a punishment. It's your psyche saying that way of living no longer fits who you're becoming. Here's a metaphor that might land. Imagine you've been walking through life wearing noise-canceling headphones, blasting music non-stop. Awakening is the moment you take them off. Suddenly, everything feels too quiet, almost uncomfortable. You notice sounds you ignored before, your breath, your thoughts, your shadow. This is where many people confuse stillness with stagnation. But stillness is active. It's your inner system reorganizing your identity, your values, and your relationship with meaning. This pause is not the absence of life. It's life preparing to move differently. Practically speaking, this is why forcing motivation right now backfires. You try to push yourself using old tools, discipline, pressure, guilt, and nothing works. So instead, experiment with listening. Go for walks without podcasts. Journal without trying to fix anything. Read books that speak to meaning rather than success. Something like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl or The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. These aren't productivity hacks, they're mirrors. They help your unconscious surface what's trying to be born beneath the silence. And here's the hook most people miss. This quiet phase always comes before a deeper form of alignment, but if you rush to escape it, you delay the next stage of transformation. Motivation, meaning, and direction will return, but only after you learn how to stand inside the silence without judging it. And that raises a much more unsettling realization you'll soon face. What if the problem isn't the silence itself, but the old identity that can't survive without noise? At some point after awakening, you notice something unsettling. Motivation doesn't crash, it evaporates. No drama, no breakdown, just a quiet meh where urgency used to live. You're not spiraling, you're functioning. But the fire that once got you out of bed, gone. And here's the part that messes with your head. You're not sad about it. That's what makes it scary. You think, should I care more? But what's really happening is that your psyche has stopped rewarding effort that no longer serves your truth. For most of your life, motivation was transactional. You worked harder, you got praise, you achieved, you felt worthy, you stayed busy, you felt safe. That system worked until awakening pulled the plug. Now, the same goals feel flat. Promotions don't excite you. Hustle culture sounds hollow. Even dreams you once prayed for feel strangely irrelevant. This isn't laziness. It's a system failure. Your ego-based motivation engine just lost power, and your soul refuses to jumpstart it again. Picture a horse that's been pulling a cart for years, driven by carrots and whips. Awakening removes both. The horse doesn't move, not because it's weak, but because it's no longer being manipulated. In that pause, confusion sets in. You wonder if you're broken. But here's the reframe. You didn't lose drive, you lost coercion. And without coercion, only authentic desire can move you forward. That's why nothing feels compelling yet. Authentic desire hasn't had space to speak. This is where people make a critical mistake. They label this phase as depression or failure and try to fix it fast. They binge content, overplan, force routines, or shame themselves into motion. But the wiser move is to audit what no longer works. Ask yourself practical questions like, which goals drain me now? Which activities feel fake? Where am I still performing instead of living? Write the answers down, not to solve them, just to see them clearly. Awareness alone starts loosening the knot. And here's the uncomfortable truth you're slowly approaching. Motivation didn't disappear by accident. It shut down on purpose. Something in you knows that if it kept pushing the old way, you'd rebuild the same life with a new label. So it pulled the brakes. But that raises the next challenge you're about to face. If the old fuel is gone, what actually moves you now? And more importantly, who are you when you're no longer driven by who you used to be? Here's where awakening stops sounding poetic and starts feeling real. What you're experiencing isn't just a spiritual upgrade, it's a psychological death. And death, even symbolic death, is never comfortable. One day you wake up and realize the person who wanted certain things, chased certain dreams, and feared certain losses, doesn't fully exist anymore. That realization can feel like standing in a house after the furniture has been removed. The walls are still there, but the familiarity is gone. Jung understood this deeply. He knew that when the unconscious becomes conscious, the old structure of the self cannot survive intact. Most people think awakening adds something, peace, wisdom, clarity. But in reality, it subtracts first. It takes away false certainty. It dissolves borrowed identities. It collapses the scaffolding that once held your motivation together. Careers, roles, ambitions, even timelines start to feel unreal, like props from a play you've stepped out of. This is why the loss of motivation feels existential. You're not just tired, you're grieving a version of yourself that once made sense of the world. And grief doesn't come with a to-do list. Think of it like a controlled burn in a forest. From the outside, it looks destructive. Trees fall, smoke rises, everything familiar disappears. But underneath, the soil is being renewed. Seeds that couldn't grow before finally have space. Jung warned that if we cling to the old forest, we choke the future. Psychological death clears the ground so a more integrated self can emerge. The problem is, no one prepares you for the moment when nothing has grown back yet. Practically, this is where patience becomes a discipline. Not passive patience, but conscious restraint. This is not the time to reinvent your entire life out of panic. It's the time to stabilize your inner ground. Simple actions matter here. Consistent sleep, clean food, regular movement like walking or stretching, and limiting overstimulation. Even reading Jung slowly, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, can help you contextualize what's happening so you don't pathologize a natural transformation. The goal isn't answers yet, it's containment, and this is the part that quietly terrifies the ego. Psychological death means you can't go back. Once you've seen through the illusion, rebuilding the old identity feels hollow. That's why forcing motivation feels like betrayal. Something in you knows the old self has already been buried, but that leads to the next destabilizing realization. If the ego is no longer in charge and the old map is gone, what exactly is supposed to guide you forward now? After the psychological death, you don't immediately step into clarity. You step into a void. And this is where almost everyone panics. The void feels like nothingness, like waiting in a hallway with no doors labeled. You're not who you were, but you're not sure who you're becoming. There's no applause here, no spiritual aesthetic, no instant wisdom to post online. Just you, your thoughts, and a strange stillness that doesn't explain itself. Most people run from this space as fast as they can because it doesn't reward performance. Only presence. Modern life is wired to fear this void. Stillness gets mislabeled as laziness. Pausing gets confused with failure. If you're not producing, achieving, or optimizing, something must be wrong, right? But deep down you can feel that this pause isn't empty. It's dense. It's heavy with something unnamed. Like soil in winter, it looks dead on the surface, yet everything essential is happening underneath. Roots are strengthening, old patterns are decomposing, new structures are quietly organizing themselves without your conscious input. Think about the last time your phone lost signal. At first, you keep refreshing, checking, forcing a connection. Eventually, you stop, and in that moment, you notice where you actually are. The void works the same way. It disconnects you from external validation so you can reconnect internally. This is why your usual motivators, deadlines, praise, fear, don't work here. The void isn't interested in pushing you forward. It's interested in pulling something honest out of you. This is where your job shifts from doing to allowing. Instead of asking, what should I do with my life? You start asking, what am I being asked to feel right now? That might look like sitting with discomfort without numbing it. Letting grief surface, admitting you don't know. Simple practices help here. Silent mornings before screens, writing one unfiltered page a day, or even doing nothing walks where you don't track steps or productivity. These aren't self-help tricks. They're invitations for your unconscious to speak. And here's the paradox. The more you respect the void, the shorter it lasts. The more you fight it, the longer you stay stuck. This space is not meant to be permanent, but it is meant to be honored. Because inside this emptiness, something critical is forming, a new internal compass that doesn't rely on pressure or fear. And once that compass starts to stir, you'll notice a subtle shift, a question that quietly changes everything. If the old self is gone, and the void isn't the enemy, then who or what is meant to lead you now? This is the moment where language starts to fail you. You try to explain what you're going through, and the words sound weak, inaccurate, almost embarrassing. You say you feel lost, but that's not quite it. You say you're unmotivated, but that misses the point. What's actually happening is far more precise. You're between selves. The old identity has loosened its grip, but the new one hasn't fully taken form. And living in that gap feels unstable, like walking on a bridge while it's still being built. In this in-between space, nothing fits the way it used to. Advice that once inspired you now feels shallow. Routines that once grounded you feel mechanical. Even compliments land differently, like they're aimed at someone you no longer recognize. This is because your internal reference point is shifting. You're no longer measuring your life against who you were, but you don't yet have the internal clarity to measure it against who you're becoming. That uncertainty can feel exhausting, Not because you're doing too much, but because you're orienting yourself without a map. Imagine upgrading your operating system while the device is still running. Glitches happen, apps crash, things freeze. But the system isn't broken, it's reorganizing at a deeper level. Your psyche is doing the same thing. It's stripping away automatic behaviors, outdated desires, and borrowed ambitions. That's why action feels harder. Every move now asks for integrity instead of impulse, and integrity takes more energy than autopilot ever did. Here's something practical you can do during this phase. Stop asking big future questions and start tracking subtle signals. Pay attention to what drains you versus what quietly energizes you. Not excitement, energy. For example, notice if writing a few lines in a notebook leaves you calmer than scrolling. Notice if deep conversations feel nourishing while small talk feels heavy. These micro-signals are clues. They're the early language of the emerging self, and they only speak softly at first. The mistake would be to force an identity too soon. New labels, new missions, new certainty, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. But the space between selves is not a void to fill. It's a process to live through. Something more aligned is assembling behind the scenes, piece by piece, and soon you'll feel a new kind of pull, not a push from fear, but a draw from something deeper. Which leads to the next shift you'll notice, the strange moment when the mask finally falls, and the old script no longer works. At some point, you realize you're not just tired of certain goals, you're tired of performing. The mask you wore for years, the one that knew how to succeed, impress, adapt, and survive, suddenly feels heavy, not evil, not wrong, just outdated. You can still put it on if you have to, but something in you resists. Conversations feel scripted. Expectations feel artificial, and you catch yourself thinking, I can't pretend this matters anymore. That's not rebellion. That's honesty finally surfacing. For most of your life, that mask was useful. It helped you belong. It helped you function. It helped you win. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social face we present to the world. The problem isn't that you had one. The problem is believing it was who you truly were. Awakening cracks that illusion. You see the game, the roles, the subtle negotiations for approval. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The script keeps running, but you're no longer convinced by the plot. This is why motivation collapses so sharply here. Your old drive depended on the mask. It thrived on recognition, comparison, status, and reward. When the mask falls, those incentives lose their grip. It's like being an actor who suddenly realizes the audience isn't real. You forget your lines, not because you're incompetent, but because the play no longer feels true. And forcing yourself to keep acting creates an inner friction that drains your energy fast. In practical terms, this is where you begin simplifying, not dramatically but quietly. You stop over-explaining. You say no more often, even when it's uncomfortable. You choose fewer commitments and notice how much lighter your body feels. You might even experiment with small acts of authenticity, dressing for comfort instead of impression, speaking slower, pausing before agreeing. These aren't lifestyle changes, they're signals. They tell your psyche, I'm listening now. But here's the catch no one warns you about. Once the mask falls, you don't instantly know how to live without it. There's a moment of social and internal awkwardness, like learning to walk again without armor. That discomfort can tempt you to grab a new mask, spiritual, minimalist, enlightened, just to feel solid again. Yet if you pause a little longer, you'll notice something subtler emerging. Not a role, not a performance, but a quieter authority beginning to take shape. And that authority doesn't come from who you appear to be. It comes from something far deeper that's about to ask for your attention next. After the mask falls, something counterintuitive happens. You don't step into confidence, you swing into stillness. The drive that once pushed you forward flips into its opposite, and suddenly doing feels unnatural. You go from "I must act" to "why act at all." This isn't regression, it's correction. Your inner pendulum is swinging hard because it spent years stuck on one extreme, and now it has to pass through the other side before it can settle into balance. Carl Jung described this dynamic as enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposite when taken too far. You pushed, you achieved, you proved. So now your psyche demands rest, silence, and non-striving. This is why forcing productivity here feels like swimming upstream. The harder you push, the more exhausted you become. Your soul isn't being lazy. It's restoring equilibrium after years of over-identification with effort and control. Think of a pendulum clock that's been stuck to one side for too long. When it's finally released, it doesn't gently move to the center. It swings wildly. That wild swing can feel disorienting. One day you feel deeply connected and peaceful. The next, empty and detached. You wonder what's wrong with you. Nothing is wrong. You're in transition. Balance is being rebuilt not intellectually, but energetically through lived experience. This phase asks for a different skill, trust without clarity. Instead of measuring progress by output, you measure it by honesty. Are you listening when your body says no? Are you allowing boredom without filling it? Are you resisting the urge to label yourself as stuck? Simple practices support this recalibration. Unstructured time, creative play without goals, reading myth or poetry instead of strategy. These nourish the psyche while the pendulum slows its swing. Eventually, you'll notice something subtle. Stillness no longer feels empty. It starts to feel fertile. Thoughts arise differently. Curiosity returns without urgency. You don't feel pushed. You feel pulled. That's the sign the pendulum is nearing center, and as it does, you'll sense the approach of another phase, one that doesn't look like striving or withdrawal, but something quieter and more solitary. A phase few people celebrate, yet almost every transformation requires it, the hermit's passage through uncertainty. This is the phase that doesn't photograph well. No milestones, no announcements, no visible wins. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening, but internally, everything is rearranging. You pull back without fully meaning to. You cancel plans. You need more solitude than usual, not because you dislike people, but because your inner world is louder than the outer one for the first time. This is the hermit phase, and despite how it's often misunderstood, it's not isolation, it's incubation. In ancient stories, this is where the hero disappears into the cave, the desert, the forest, not to escape life, but to hear it more clearly. Carl Jung understood this pattern well. He knew that before a deeper self can emerge, the psyche needs distance from collective noise. That's why conversations may feel draining now, even with people you love. Your nervous system is learning a new language, and constant input drowns it out. Here's the metaphor most people miss. This phase is not about becoming inactive. It's about becoming inwardly active. Think of a caterpillar inside a cocoon. From the outside, it's just there. But inside, it's dissolving into something unrecognizable before reorganizing itself entirely. Productivity culture hates this stage because there's nothing to measure, no KPIs for soul work. Yet this is where the deepest rewiring happens. Practically, this is a time to protect your energy without dramatizing it. You don't need to cut everyone off or move to the mountains. Small choices matter more, fewer notifications, more silence in the morning, consuming less information and creating small private rituals. Tea before sunrise, handwritten notes, reading a few pages of something timeless instead of trending. Books like Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse or even quiet fiction can support this phase better than self-improvement content ever could. The danger here isn't withdrawal, it's misinterpretation. If you judge this phase as wasting time, you'll rush to exit it and carry unfinished patterns forward. But if you allow it, something shifts. You begin to feel grounded in yourself, rather than stimulated by the world. And from that groundedness, a new question starts to form. Not how do I succeed, but what actually wants to live through me now? That question doesn't need an answer yet. It only needs space. And space is exactly what the next phase demands even more deeply. This is where the journey turns uncomfortable in a very specific way. Not dramatic discomfort, quiet, intimate discomfort. The kind that shows up when you're alone and something inside you asks to be seen that you'd rather keep buried. After awakening, after the void, after the hermit phase, the shadow doesn't knock loudly. It waits. And when life finally slows down enough, it steps forward. Not to punish you, but to be integrated. This is the moment when wholeness demands honesty. Carl Jung was clear about this. Becoming whole isn't about adding light, it's about reclaiming what was split off. Your anger, envy, grief, neediness, ambition, fear of being ordinary, all the traits you learned to hide to be accepted. Awakening removes the distraction that kept these parts suppressed. That's why motivation stalls here. Your psyche is saying, we can't move forward while parts of us are still locked in the basement. Think of it like cleaning out a house you've lived in for decades. You don't start with the living room. You start with the storage rooms, dusty boxes, old letters, broken tools, things you forgot you owned. Shadow work is exactly that. Not self-judgment, not self-improvement, but self-reclamation. You don't fix the shadow. You listen to it. You ask what it protected you from. And slowly it stops sabotaging you from behind the scenes. Practically, this phase asks for courage, not action. One powerful practice is naming without shaming. When a reaction arises, jealousy, resentment, boredom, don't suppress it or spiritualize it away. Write it down plainly. I feel jealous of X. I'm angry about Y. No explanation, no moralizing. Another tool is reflective reading. Books like Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson help you see these patterns as human, not pathological. The goal isn't to become pure, it's to become honest. Here's the paradox most people never hear. Shadow integration restores energy. The parts of you that were hidden were also holding your life force hostage. When you stop fighting them, motivation begins to seep back in, not as pressure, but as coherence. You feel less fragmented, less internally divided, and that coherence creates movement, not yet loud, not yet directional, but real. And as that energy returns, you start to sense it. Something new is rising, not urgency, not ambition, a quieter impulse, one that doesn't shout, do more, but whispers, move this way. And that whisper is the doorway to the final shift you're about to experience. At first, you barely trust it. This new motivation doesn't arrive with adrenaline or urgency. There's no rush, no grand announcement, no 5-year vision attached to it. It shows up quietly, almost shyly, like a small flame you shield with your hands. You notice it in subtle moments, when an idea keeps returning, when a conversation leaves you strangely energized, when you feel drawn to create something even if no one ever sees it. This isn't the old fire. This one doesn't burn you out. It warms you from the inside. This is where Carl Jung would say the self begins to lead. Not the ego self that chases recognition, but the deeper center that cares about meaning over image. Motivation here isn't about proving your worth. It's about expressing truth. That's why it feels calmer. You're no longer running from fear or lack. You're responding to resonance, and the shift is subtle but radical. You don't ask, will this work? As much as you ask, is this honest? A powerful way to recognize this new fire is to notice how your body responds. The old motivation felt tight, pressure in the chest, tension in the jaw, urgency in the mind. This one feels spacious, grounded. You might still feel tired, confused, or unsure at times, but you don't feel internally betrayed anymore. For example, you may feel drawn to write, teach, build, or help, not because it pays or impresses, but because not doing it feels like ignoring a quiet calling. That's alignment replacing ambition. Practically, this is where small, faithful actions matter more than big plans. Instead of forcing direction, you follow curiosity. Read what genuinely intrigues you. Create without announcing it. Serve where you feel naturally pulled, mentoring one person, starting a small project, learning a skill that feels oddly meaningful. Notice how this kind of action gives energy back instead of draining it. That's how you know you're no longer running on ego fuel. You're running on coherence. And here's the final twist most people never expect. This new motivation doesn't make life perfect or effortless. You'll still face doubt, fatigue, and moments of confusion. But what's gone is the constant inner resistance. You're no longer dragging yourself through a life that doesn't fit. You're walking with life instead of against it. And once you taste that, even briefly, you realize there's no going back. Not because you shouldn't, but because you finally wouldn't want to. Now comes the part that actually changes your life. Insight alone isn't enough. Awareness without application quietly turns into frustration. So here's the invitation. Stop trying to fix your lack of motivation and start listening to what it's asking of you. Ask yourself, where am I still forcing myself to live from an old identity? Where am I chasing instead of responding? What would change if I trusted this slower, quieter rhythm instead of fighting it? Take one small action this week that honors alignment over performance. Maybe it's saying no without over-explaining. Maybe it's creating something privately, just for the joy of expression. Maybe it's allowing rest without guilt. Notice how your energy responds, not immediately, but subtly. That's how the new fire grows, not in explosions, but in steady warmth. And be honest with yourself. Are you willing to let go of who you used to be to make space for who you're becoming? So here's the deeper question I'll leave you with. If your old motivation was built on fear, approval, and pressure, what kind of life becomes possible when your new motivation is built on truth? If this journey resonated with something you've been silently navigating, let it move through you. Don't just consume it. Share your experience in the comments. I want to hear what this phase has been like for you. And if you want to keep exploring psychology, soul, and self-awareness with depth and clarity, subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and activate notifications. This path isn't about becoming more impressive. It's about becoming more whole.